I'm going to move us along to the next part of our agenda, but thank you for providing some really rich stories on the B2B selling environment. You know, we've talked about the ongoing complexity of solution selling. It's not getting simpler. The importance of relevance, the importance of fearless questions. The other thing is we just finished talking about, you know, the importance of the planning process and how light it can be, but also how important it is in more complex selling. And obviously, in the war for talent that we have, and it's not getting easier. I mean, I think sales turnover right now is running at about 25. In some companies, it's around 40% right now. So, you know, we've got the law of 2 feet. These people are pretty mobile. And so, you know, the ongoing engagement, I think the part that I see missing still, and it's a longer conversation, maybe for a future webinar, is that we don't change our plans for sometimes the onboarding, right? We're building new resources. We set these plans. It may take them 6 months, but more often might take them a year to ramp. And then, you know, when they're quota bearing, right? And so I think we've got some still challenges in that regard. So I want to move our focus to Greg a little bit. Shannon will respond, but we've asked Greg to describe in his new book, the 3P selling approach. He's going to I don't know if you're going to define B2B selling. Maybe we can focus in on the pillars of success. And I'm really curious about why you wrote the book and how to make it work. And then Greg, feel free to pull Shannon in yourself, but that's the next part of our session. I'm going to go on mute so you don't hear any background noise, but I'm turning the floor over to you, Greg.
Great. Thanks, Cindy. As I mentioned earlier, I spent a lot of time either managing sales teams or as a consultant coaching sales teams. I probably 8 or 9 different sales teams over the years. And last couple roles I had, which were fractional head of sales roles, I was just awestruck again about how, whether they're junior people or senior people, they were all making the same mistakes. And I just felt like saying, here's my book, just read this, right? And I don't know if it was the fact that people hadn't been on sales training or they were on poor sales training or complex sales training, or no one ever reinforced it, but they were just doing the same things over and over wrong. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to write something that is simple, not necessarily easy, but simple to understand, to give you the foundation of what are the things you need to do to be successful. And particularly, you know, with what you were saying earlier, Cindy, about turnover in sales. Every sales leader, and this is where I'm going to bring you in, Shannon, is every sales leader says, you know, I'm just going to go hire a couple stars, you know, a couple of really top-notch salespeople, and I'll knock my numbers out. Well, the reality is there aren't many top-notch stars, and they don't want to stay with you very long. And even if they do, they want to get promoted. So that's not a winning strategy. The trick is, how do I take a B player and with some tools and process and management coaching, turn them into an A player? Shannon, what's your experience on that? You've been muted.
I must say that my kids would love the ability to put me on mute. So great question, Greg. You know what? I think, you know, you've hit the nail on the head. You know, I would much rather have the opportunity to kind of coach folks up through their sales journey than coach out. And I, you know, I've been quoted at saying that many times. Because building that skill is a lot easier and frankly a lot less costly than having to churn through people. So process, support, and coaching. You know, it still surprises me a ton that you know, we get on calls with our teams, and yet in the debrief we maybe don't give the constructive coaching that's needed in order to help somebody along. So I try to be super honest and caring in my approach, because if we can't be successful together, nobody's going to be successful individually. So I'm not sure if if there's maybe something specifically you were looking for with the question, but I think process, and all of the things that I was mentioning about pre-call alignment and planning and debriefing afterwards, just kind of helps folks, regardless of their skill level, kind of be more successful in their approach than if they were left to their own devices and kind of doing it on their own without somebody really caring enough to give them some feedback to help them along the way.
Right, absolutely. So the starting point in the book is actually the first chapter is define selling, right? What is selling? And you ask, 100 sales reps, you get 100 different answers. My favorite is it's getting people to buy my stuff, right? But it's so what do you do? And I start by differentiating. There's two kinds of sales situations. There's the simple sale or transactional sale that we're all familiar with. Go to a grocery store or electronics store, whatever. Here's the product, here's the price, right? I call that clerking. It's a kind of a two-step. I give information, I ask for the order. We have a sale on today. Would you like to buy right now? Right? Will that be cash or credit? So we give information, we ask for the order. But we know that doesn't work very well in B2B. B2B is what we call a complex sale or a consultative sale. And what makes it different is two key things. Is that the linkage between a product feature or functionality and its benefit is not always obvious. And the buying process is complicated. There's not just one person with a credit card. We're talking about 10 people who have different needs and different perspectives, and and finance and IT who's going to jump in and bring their perspective. So it's a very complex process. And so the reason a lot of reps struggle with it is, number one, we're used to a transactional sale, a clerking sale. And so we think that that's what it should be. We perhaps haven't been given a lot of sales training. Most of our sales training is product oriented, right? And so, or we've been given a sales methodology that's just so complicated, I can't remember. I'm just going to talk about my product. So understanding what it is that B2B selling is an important starting point. And so to answer the question, what is B2B selling? In my opinion, it's creating awareness. In fact, that's why there's a light bulb on my book. It's creating light bulb moments. It's getting people to say, you know what, that problem is pretty important. I really should deal with that. It is more urgent than I originally thought. You know what, I really should take into consideration, is this feature important? You know what, we really should get Bob as part of the purchasing process. So it's creating that awareness of the need to do something slightly different. And in my mind, that's really what B2B selling is. Shannon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I when you were talking about clerking, I was thinking about that, do you want fries with that approach, right? It's very simplistic, and the challenge, so B2B, yes, I agree with you, more complex, and it's that consultative piece, which I find is hard to get people to be comfortable with asking questions, broad enough questions and deep enough questions where you may not know exactly where they're going to end up. Oh my gosh, they're going to tell me something that I don't know how to respond to. And so people stay very kind of superficial in asking questions. And as soon as they get one or two, questions out that suggest that, the problem is A, they're very quick to try to move the process forward, but A isn't maybe necessarily important, or it's in the grand scheme of things a small problem, and then we miss the opportunity to kind of go a little bit deeper. So it's this, again, I'm fiercely curious. I don't know, Cindy, maybe I do need to think about this gremlin that I have, but it's to try to coach people to be comfortable asking questions and realize you may not always know where it's going to go. But when you get there, you can kind of help usher people along to connecting information in many different ways, or contextualize it within a specific process within an organization. And all of a sudden, light bulbs will not only go on with one person, but the hopefully the 4 or 5 that you've got there together, because you're speaking a language that resonates with everyone, as opposed to kind of one key person.
Yeah, and it's the kind of question asking, so how much do you spend on this product each year? That doesn't cause any light bulbs to go off generally. Or how many people do you have in that group? Or so what we call factual questions. They tend not to create awareness. But if you said, if this problem got any greater and it caused you to miss your sales numbers for this quarter, what would that do for you? So that's a thought-provoking question where the light bulb might go on and go, oh my God, I could lose my job, or I wouldn't get my bonus. Oh, that's a big deal, right? So asking questions that cause people to think creates awareness. And that's why it's not just the question itself, it's the kinds of questions.
Greg, can you maybe move on to the pillars of success?
Sure.
We want to make sure we can cover the content because it's so rich in the book.
Thanks, Andy. So if you ask yourself, what do sellers do? They do 3 things. They investigate to understand. They ask questions to influence. And then they message back once they've understood and influenced. And so the follow-on is where do you want to investigate, influence, and message? And there are 3 areas, and they just happen to start with the letter P. So you want to investigate around problems. What problems does the customer have, ideally that you solve better than someone else? How important are they, which is a combination, are they urgent? And do they have a lot of impact, right? And can you put a number to them? Is that a $5,000 problem, a $500,000 problem, a $5 million problem? The second area you want to look for is around people. So who has those problems? What are their perspectives on solving those problems or on the importance of those problems? And who has decision influence, high level of decision influence? We know that some people have more power than others around making a final purchasing decision. What level do people have? And so process is around this buying decision process. So where are they in their decision process? How are we as a company positioned within that process? And lastly, what are the best things we can do to move ourselves forward, right? And move the buying process forward. So it's understanding, influencing, and messaging in those 3 areas.
Shannon, thoughts on what Greg just shared? Otherwise, I've got a quick point.
Go ahead, Cindy.
So one of the things I wanted to do a probe on, Greg, is are you seeing that B2B companies are putting in the logic where the personas are documented, the questions, in other words, there's ways of distilling what we've just said into, guided dialogue, right? I remember when I was a partner at Accenture, we'd be loaded up. This CFO, this EVP of HR, these are their typical problems. These are their typical metrics. These are the kinds of questions on selling an SAP complex sale that you should all ask. We'd have our cheat sheets, right? But what I found was some of the questions were so logical that they were almost annoying. And so they were lacking some creativity and discovery, right? Because things get very nuanced. And so you can sound mechanical too, if your questions don't sound really authentic. So I just wouldn't mind your perspective on that, because I'm agreeing. I know you need to guide people, they need to learn, but there's pros and cons and how much rigidity you put into constructs, right, and frameworks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So a couple things on there. So yes, I've seen a lot of companies create personas and, pitch guides and based on various personas or industries, stuff like that. The key is not to make them too complicated. If they're too complicated, people don't use them, right? They sit on the shelf. So how can I give people more of a framework to ask questions, to explore, rather than question one, question two, question three, right? Because it can go in all kinds of different directions. And so that's what I attempted to create, was a framework, as opposed to a prescriptive, you must do this and this and this in this order, because it does come across kind of mechanical. The key, I think, is while process and the science of selling is really important, there's still a little bit of an art form there, which is having the ability to switch, or come up with a new question, or go down a different direction versus the one you had. But I think a framework that allows for flexibility is key. Not having written out questions that you follow one after the other. I think that's not very productive.
Shannon, thoughts on what we're talking about in terms of, the communication dynamics for effective solutioning?
So your personality has to come through. So I think I'm agreeing with what you're both saying. But at the end of the day, while you have a framework, you still need to be able to get certain pieces of information, I think, in order to know whether or not the probability of somebody buying what you have to sell is going to happen. So we kind of subscribe to BANT as a methodology, which is, just, Greg, I agree with you. You're gonna have a framework. You have different ways to ask questions. You don't want it to be a grocery list that you feel like you're all of a sudden interrogating the person you have or the people that you have. I've got to collect all of this information, but let your personality come through and be listening enough to have a fluid conversation. But that the success and the objectives you're trying to get out of that meeting should ideally answer budget, authority, need, timeline, so that you can understand, not just based on how you feel and how good the conversation was, but what is the materiality that this opportunity is going to move forward.
Yep.
So Greg, if you want to close off the making it work part of your presentation, that would be great.
Sure. Successes, I talk about there's 4 key processes. It's kind of a playbook that reps need to be good at. There's many more, but I say the 4 are prospecting, call management, opportunity management, and pipeline management. If you don't do those well, you're never going to be continually successful. It requires a framework with flexibility. Certainly what I've discovered is strategies are kind of universal selling strategies. I've sold my book, and I got a couple in Japan and a couple in Netherlands and all over the world. So strategies are pretty consistent on how do you drive sales success. Tactics vary by culture. So you need to adjust to that culture, whether in Canada, the US, or in Europe or Asia. Those tactics will be very different. Certainly sales management coaching, we talked about that earlier. Inspection, reinforcement, coaching around that. In my role as a sales trainee many, many years ago, I noticed that you could watch 2 things in a sales interaction. You could watch the deal, or you could watch the selling process. And as a sales trainer, I watch the sales process. So at the end, a lot of sales managers, they watch the deal. This guy, he's thinking more about buying this, or, this other person looks like they've got more power. So that's watching the deal. But you also need to watch what questions were asked that were really powerful? Which ones were not? Right. And so the coaching needs to be around more than just did we move the deal forward, but what behaviors were used that positioned us better.
Lots of thought to really thinking deeply on the questions, right? I think this is a good reinforcement, right? You think about the speed we're all running at and working at, right? And you may do your call planning, but in the moment, the fluidity, I think you underscored the word fluidity, Shannon, and to embrace the conversation and to pause whatever other, frameworks are in your mind, right? That takes a very particular skill set, of a really skilled B2B sales professionals, right? To know when to veer off a question that you always like, because in that dynamic that you're in, it's not relevant, to use your relevant term, right? Just full of richness. I just encourage everybody that's on the webinar to read the 3P selling approach. We'll talk a little bit more about it at the end, but Greg, thanks so much for reading it. I'm 3/4 of the way side. It's right by my bedside next to my holiday tree. So you are well looked after, Greg. We're going to move a conversation along. Going to turn it over to my partner, Malay Yapatye, and Malay will continue in the discussion of the Q&A. So Malay, I'll let you embrace the audience and just thank everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Greg and Shannon, for a lovely conversation. We talked about a lot of things, but Shannon, I understand you have a hard stop for a client call that you absolutely have to move to. Typically, we do a Q&A, but I would like to give you an opportunity to just have your closing comments so that you can go attend that call and we don't hold you up.
Oh, I appreciate it. So I just want to say thank you. I feel like sales is a profession where you're always learning. So I like to say be in sponge mode as much as you can. Even though, we get very comfortable in an approach, there's always an opportunity to read a new book or learn from people in your network. So thank you for creating this forum, Cindy, Malay, and pleasure meeting you, Greg. I've enjoyed reading your book.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. Good luck on your call and your fearless curiosity. Thank you for your
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Shannon. All right, and for the rest of us, we can, I hope, go over a few minutes just to cover off a couple of questions. Now, one question that we have for you, Cindy, is mainly around the application of advanced analytics into sales, which is something that, of course, we are so close to. And I'm sure our audience would love to hear from you, given that this is the Predictive AI World Forum. So could you say a few words on your understanding of the importance of digital literacy and the application of advanced analytics in sales today?
For sure. I think given our topics on B2B selling, I think we've kind of underscored the importance of complexity, right? And when you move into AI, you are introducing a new set of language as well. So your hiring of your sales resources need to be schooled in digital literacy, right? Because you're dealing with a whole operating process of building an AI model, the data collection, the cleansing of the data. In these kinds of sales cycles, as you know, Malay, you may have a chief data scientist there or advanced engineers that want to understand the algorithmic methods that you're using, right? So there's a deeper technology review that comes into the advanced analytics space. I mean, what I've learned, I would say, would be three things about selling advanced analytics and the kind of approaches you need to take. I think first and foremost, you really need to ensure you understand where the client's readiness is in applying advanced AI. And obviously, if you're selling into mid to large clients, you will have a propensity where they're already experimenting, making sure that you know what methodologies they're applying, right? Because if they're using Amazon SageMaker Malay, or if they're on the Microsoft Azure stack, or if they're more open source oriented, all of those contexts create a lens. Now, the interesting thing in the sales space is in our software, we sell to sales professionals. their level of digital literacy in AI and data sciences is right now very poor. So if you look at the changing role of B2B sales professionals, and on the recruiting side, the digital literacy skill set's got to come up significantly in terms of being comfortable working with platforms like maybe Power BI, which is an AI, but you are now having to create and enable complex reporting, right? I mean, this is a major topic at the schools that are building sales literacy training to increase the digital literacy. I mean, Dr. Karen Piesker, at least, for those of you in Canada, who's over at the Toronto Metropolitan University, has a very significant focus on digital sales literacy. So that's, a key attribute. The second point I think I would make, just trying to speed up my comments here, is that you have to qualify quickly. And Greg, that's really important in the sales process, but if the readiness isn't there for the client, in the enablements and the skills or the data quality, Malay, as you're wasting your time, right? Because AI is highly dependent on data. So the skills in qualifying have to be very precise, and you can't discern that until you get into conversation with different stakeholders, because often the sales professional does not know how much data they have or its readiness, right? So we've seen that too, right? And probably the third point is to really inspire, I would say, the inspiration to get them set in the right direction. Because if they don't build the foundation in AI and digital literacy, they're not going to survive. I mean, this world is moving so fast. And what we see now is simply a little drop in a huge tsunami of advanced analytics and AI practices. I mean, it's an exciting time to be living, Malay. It really, really is. So those are some observations that I'd have.
No, absolutely, and I'm so glad you delivered that cold hard truth, the punch right in the end. Now, Greg, just before we close off for the day, we've talked about some really great concepts and angles of thinking. We talked about fearless curiosities, of course, your point on the focus on relevance versus relationships, the P3, as you mentioned, as well as a lot of difference that makes on the perspective of buying process versus looking at everything from a selling process. Before we close off, any last comment, a key message that you'd like our listeners now and in the future to leave this conversation with?
Yeah, if somebody asked me, what one bit of advice would you give a seller going forward? I'm going to cheat and give you two. I would say the first one is to focus on problems and not product, right? When you start coming in and say, hey, we want to see if you have these kinds of problems, which goes to Cindy's point around qualification. If they don't have those problems, then you don't have any reason to talk to them or tell them about your product, right? So focusing on problems versus product, and that will immediately get your prospects to see you in a different light. I'm a consultant, I'm not a seller, right? The second one is to focus on the buying process, change their role to be an expert on the buying process rather than just trying to lunch people or take them for drinks or whatever like that. Be an expert on it. Gartner had some great research lately of how it's not just the selling process more complicated, it's a buying process. A lot of organizations struggle with buying because of the complexity with it. And it leads to buyer's remorse and a whole lot of cycles. And sometimes they just say, forget about it. So if you can go in there and say, let me show you how to make the buying process easier. Let me show you some information sources. Let me show you a decision process. Then you're seen as much more valuable than just someone who's an expert on your product.
Thank you. All right. Greg, thank you for those last words, and Cindy, of course, for guiding this conversation and your thoughts on the digital literacy and the need for it. With that, we come to the end of our conversation today. I would like to thank Greg and Shannon, who had to leave earlier, of course, both of you for your expertise and bring that to the table. Contrasting views, aligned views, we had the whole mix. And as a reminder, I would like to tell everyone listening that you can find this recording as well as all our past events at our AI Predictive World Forum online, and that's at saleschoice.com/resources. That's a resources section on our website, and you'll find more than you can grasp in terms of thought leadership, as well as an interesting pattern on how the techniques that work and do not work have evolved over the last half decade that we have been doing this. With that, I would like to thank everyone, our attendees, as well as the audience once again now and in the future. Cindy, Craig, it was a pleasure having you. SalesChoice.com, as everyone knows, is an AI platform that offers sales insights to help increase win rates and improve revenue and performance for sales teams. But it also now offers Mood Insights, which is an entirely new and extremely relevant app that helps reduce costs and improve operational efficiency by focusing on the well-being of employees and risk factors, operationally or not, that may be existing and would otherwise go unnoticed. All that and more can be found on our website at saleschoice.com. I invite you all to visit it. For now, it was lovely having all of you. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. Thanks, Cindy.
Thanks, Craig.